Economist. I got the Explorer, right? So my parents gave me their old truck. They didn't need it anymore. It's a 98 Ford Explorer with like 91,000 miles on it. It's like practically new on the inside. The thing hardly even looks sat in. So this is pretty cool. I'm happy to actually have a new vehicle to drive around. Speaking of new vehicles, well, it's not new, it's new to me, but speaking of new vehicles, the chip shortage that kept all these vehicles from being produced for everybody to buy is now turning, the chips shortage anyway, is now turning into a glut. And this is something that I had predicted 2 years ago. I'm going to leave a link down in the description to it. Right in the middle of a major shortage of, these semiconductor chips, I could just tell from the experiences that I have had within the distribution network that at some point we were going to see the glut of semiconductors hit the market, and we're now starting to see these news articles coming out. We've been seeing them for a while, but I thought I'd bring this one back up again. And it's just another sign of what takes place with the bullwhip effect, right? When you have these misunderstandings of what has taken place throughout the distribution network, you end up finding where overproduction starts to take place. You end up with an oversupply, undersupply, oversupply again. And you can find it taking place in all kinds of stuff, not just inside of like semiconductors, but we found it taking place in lumber. I saw it happening with the eggs, when eggs shot up in major price. Everybody was, calling manipulation and whatever, but we did our egg video on it as well, predicting again that you would see egg prices crash in the future due to the overproduction that would come from it. And essentially that's what happened. So again, like the bullwhip effect, you can see it taking place. Now, it was really obvious to me when I saw it happening with lumber. Now, when I started describing some of the things that I was experiencing within the lumber industry, it was the viewers who brought it up. They're like, dude, what you're describing is the bullwhip effect. And, I had heard of the bullwhip effect at the time, but didn't really know a lot about it. So, I went and read, a lot about this bullwhip effect. And I said, man, this is exactly what I am experiencing. And so to kind of understand it, just for those who may not, know what the bullwhip effect is or heard me talk about it, if you can imagine, I used a scenario with the plumbing fitting, but it doesn't really matter what it is. It's just any item that's really out there. What ends up happening when you have a shortage or a restriction in the supply of it, the demand for these particular products starts to go up. It's not necessarily like an increase in actual demand, but it's an increase in demand from the people's perception that they will not get this product going into the future. And so what they'll do is they'll end up buying more than what they really need. Or like in the case of like a lot of stores, they'll end up ordering more than what they really need in order to acquire the actual products or the actual amount that they're looking for. So like in allocations, I guess I should have described it like that, but you have allocations that take place that causes more demand to it. So like if somebody believes that they are going to, receive, like they order 10, but they only receive 3, they might order 30 so they can get their 10. You see what happens there? So you have this overwhelming consumer demand that starts to take place when people have a misunderstanding of what is actually taking place out there. So when I described it, I described using a plumbing fitting, and we came up in short supply on this particular plumbing fitting. It's just a little rubber coupling that has hose clamps on each end of it. I don't really want to use brand names, but you all know what I'm talking about. And it's used for joining two just kind of different types of pipe, and it's a very simple piece that a lot of people who do like groundwork, excavation, septic systems, they'll use this particular part. And I liked using this one because I saw it. It was really obvious to me when it took place. Now, for those of you who don't know, I work retail at a hardware store. So this particular part came up in short supply. We couldn't get it. Well, a lot of people who were looking for, do this groundwork, looking for this particular product, when it finally came in, they just bought everything I had. Right? And they're like, no, I'm going to keep them in the truck. I'll never come up short again. This thing costs, this one $10 part cost me $10,000, held up $10,000 because I couldn't, find one of these things. So I'm going to make sure that I always have a supply of them. So he buys everything off the shelf. Next customer comes in after I get a supply, does the exact same thing for the same reasons. Well, now the distribution network sees something very different. Like I see it as, no, you guys are panic buying, but they see it as a legitimate purchase and that the demand is now moving up. And so when you see a constant out of stock or that you need to replenish with a particular quantity, you increase the quantity. You go from 4 to 8, right? Because you need more on hand. So this starts to increase the demand, but it's not real, right? It's just these panic buyings that are taking place. Well, as you start moving up the distribution network, you're going to start finding like the distributors are saying, hey, we need more of this product. They go to the wholesalers. Wholesalers are like, hey, there's a huge demand for this product. They go to the manufacturers, hey, we need a lot of this stuff. The manufacturers are like, yeah, we'll ramp up production. They ramp up production, start pushing that stuff into the system, but then by the time it starts flooding in and starts filling all the sluices, so to speak, right, it fills up the shelves, then that overwhelming consumer demand disappears. Gone, right? Because now all of a sudden there's no panic buying taking place. The guys who would typically want these particular parts and were buying as many as they could because they were afraid they weren't going to get them, now see that they're constantly there and they don't stress about panic buying anymore. And that's when you start having the glut of product starts to fly into the system. And you can find this taking place in all kinds of things. It was easy for me to recognize it in lumber, and I said that this was going to take place throughout the rest of the economy, or in that many things within the economy were going to experience something very similar to lumber. And now we're starting to find these articles coming out that are describing just that. All right, I forgot my glasses, so I'm gonna have a hell of a time trying to read all this. Okay. Bad info leads supply demand imbalances every time. Hey, it's great to see you back up in the chats all nighter, man. This is great. And kids going nuts over the birds out there. Okay. Thoughts of Federal Reserve telling banks to start keeping 2% cash reserves up from 0. Well, that's to be honest, I want to kind of process a little bit more about what this is actually going to do, but this is going back to what I guess would be referred to as the limited reserve basis. Like, we were in an abundant reserve system, right, for the last quite a few years, where they took, reserve requirements to 0. Before that, they had to keep a certain amount of reserves on hand, and they didn't really need to keep a limited reserve because they had an abundant reserve. Right? So let me see if I can describe this a little bit better. So the big banks like the JP Morgans, Goldman Sachs, all these other guys, they're like the primary dealers, right? So when Treasury goes to auction, they're the ones who basically go to the auction and do all the purchases. Okay. So these big banks, they hold a lot of treasuries, right? Now these are the reserves that they have. They can hold it in cash, they can hold it in treasuries, right? Now, when you think about a limited reserve system, right? That's where these big banks at the end of the day, some of them would be in need of reserves, some of them would have excess reserves. The ones who have excess reserves would lend them to the ones who are in need of reserves. And that overnight lending rate, that was the effective fund rate. So when the Federal Reserve wanted to adjust the effective fund rate, they would buy and sell securities off the big banks until the amount that was on their balance sheet created the effective fund rate that they were shooting for. So if there was a lot sitting on these big banks' balance sheet, then the effective fund rate would probably drop as the demand for the overnight lending would be less if there was plenty in there. Does that make sense? Right? So, but if there's a limited amount, well, then you would have the effective fund rate rising as the amount of money within the system would be limited for that overnight lending. Okay, now I know that's kind of confusing. We actually experienced something of a major problem back in September of 2019 when that overnight lending rate shot up to 10%. And the Federal Reserve basically lost control of the banking system at that point. But they stepped up and said, not like they weren't thinking this wasn't going to happen, but they stepped in with the repo facility and then started saying, hey, you got a bunch of treasuries, you don't have enough cash, give us the treasuries, we'll give you cash, we'll do this on an overnight basis, and we won't call it quantitative easing, it's non-QE QE. So, are we moving away from the abundant reserve system? Because essentially what they did is they took the bank's balance, or took the reserve requirements to 0. They all ended up flooded with a bunch of reserves, and now establishing that effective fund rate is the excess reserves either going to the Federal Reserve account on excess reserves or the repo facility. So it's kind of like that effective fund rate or the overnight lending rate being the effective fund rate, or how they established it, left the banks and moved over to the repo facility and the interest on excess reserves. So that's how they established the effective fund rate. If they were to go back to a limited reserve system or a 2% reserve requirement, they could be taking that effective fund rate back to the overnight lending rate between the big banks. Does that kind of make sense? I don't know if that's what's taking place. That's why I kind of wanted to get a little bit more information on it, but that's kind of what I'm assuming is happening. Is Dishes Every Day up in here? Yes, she is. Thank you very much. If you go over and give Dishes Every Day a subscription, let her know how much you appreciate her putting her videos out there, trying to get it monetized. So if you go and subscribe to her channel, that would certainly help out with getting the videos or getting the YouTube channel up to that partnership program ability. All right. I bought 2 60 egg boxes for $6.50 at Walmart when you made the comment about eggs. It's going well. Got both my kids with me for my birthday anniversary. Headed to Bonfire in a few hours. Whoa, bro. When's your birthday? My birthday was yesterday. July 27th was my birthday. Dielectric Union. 5 dozen eggs were $45 in Alaska. Oh my gosh. So back to typical prices, and they were available. My gosh. Everything in Alaska is so expensive. Great to be back. It's good to see you, bro. All right. Think the housing market will have the same bullwhip effect, and we're in the I'll buy more than I need and keep in the truck phase. Okay, so I've thought about that. Now, you think about it. Right now, prices of homes are incredibly elevated, right? Now, when you think about like the demand for homes, that's very elevated right now. And when you think about the demand for lumber at the time when there wasn't a lot of it out there, the demand was very high and the limit was very low. What happened to the mills? They went into massive production. They were pumping out a lot of lumber at the time that lumber price was at $1,700 per thousand. The problem was getting it through the distribution network. So they were pumping out a lot of lumber, trying to get it through the system. Once it flooded the system and all the rail hubs, once all the the rail lines, the hubs, the distribution, like retail centers, everybody had their lumber. Like once it filled up lumber, it fell, boom. Right? Prices dropped out. Now, if we were to see that same bullwhip effect in homes, once the prices moved up, then you would see like a boom in production, right? Like people would be like, man, I want to jump in and build a house when these prices are elevated, right? That's when you want to get in. Just like the lumber mills wanted to get in when it was at 1,700, they were pumping out a lot of lumber trying to take advantage of that. They filled up the system, right? They overproduced and crashed the prices. Well, that would have to take place within the housing market, right? If you want that bullwhip effect to take place, ultimately you would have to have the builders going, holy moly, look at the price, I want to jump in, and then go into massive amounts of production, and then that would create the bullwhip effect, right? You would have this overproduction taking place, but it's not happening. Not yet anyway. It still could. But as of now, I don't see that part of the bullwhip effect actually playing out in the retail or in the real estate market. I mean, give it some time and it might. All right. Hey, Matt, good to see you. Did you ever get a chance to run your stocks through a dividend investment calculator? Yeah, I did. That type of calculator has a DRIP you can add to the equation. Yeah, I did mess around with it a little bit. And, it got me excited about buying more into dividend paying stocks because really, I forget exactly what the number was to be enough to make my house payment or something like that. But really, it didn't seem that far away, as far as like having something that would, because it's weird to think about like investments, because a lot of times people, when they invest in stuff, they're more speculating than they are actually investing, and when you're investing, you're actually putting your money towards something that is going to have some sort of return to it, right? Like dividend paying stock or rental income or something of that nature. a lot of times when people are buying gold, they think, okay, well, I'm investing in gold, but you're not really investing in gold. You're speculating in gold on the idea that you're going to be able to sell it for a higher price. You know, when you go into like buying stocks, a lot of times people will speculate in the stock market too, thinking that, you know, oh, the stock market's going to go up and I'll be able to sell the stock off for a high price. But that's not really investing. Again, that's speculating. You know, like looking at particular companies and choosing that particular company because you think they're going to do well or something. That's more of an investment kind of thing. So yeah, it's got me more excited about, like, you know, looking into dividend stocks and how much that I would actually need to, you know, retire on or something like that, or to at least have some sort of generating income where I wouldn't have to, you know, worry about work or something like that. But yeah, it's definitely, I didn't like necessarily like spend a lot of time messing with it, but I did mess with it a little bit, Matt. Thank you for bringing that up too. I read Joseph Wang's Central Banking 101 several times this season. It helped my understanding greatly. Yeah, Joseph Wang is a cool dude too. I don't know how many people have ever listened to Joseph Wang, but he was a former Fed employee, like he worked for the Federal Reserve. But man, this guy really knows his stuff, and I haven't listened to him in a while. I met him personally, and talk about a really chill, nice guy, man, and super intelligent. And he had a lot of the same like credible threat theories that I had. He didn't describe them with credible threats, but he described them in another fashion, signaling or whatever. But very much in line with a lot of the stuff that I was saying that the Federal Reserve does before they actually move. They put out this narrative so that they can get the people, you know, basically prepared for the news, you know, get them in position so there's no shock and awe event. All right. Let's see here. All nighter. I was still alive and got all my fingers and toes. Love the Explorer. Yeah, I do too, man. This thing is in really great shape. It drives really nice. You know, like my vehicles that I've driven for a long time now have just been kind of crappy vehicles, but you know, it's an old car, but it's in really great shape. So, no, I'm happy. Um, Commercial fishing is very dangerous, but pays good. Yeah, it sure does. No shit, my B-days. All right, man. All-nighter and our birthdays are a day apart. I'm the 27th, he's the 28th, man. That is so awesome. Happy birthday, all-nighter. Yeah, happy birthday, all-nighter. Eggs are 99 cents a dozen now in Fargo. Deflated eggs, you know. And so it was like, you know, that's something I have to think about. Like whenever, you know, when you look at eggs and you're like, man, look at the money printer go bird, look at eggs, you know, and I'm like, no, it's not, right? I mean, if it was the case, then what happened to all the inflation, right? What happened to all the inflation in eggs or lumber or, you know, anything else that might have come down in price? I mean, there's so many things out there that you can point the finger at and say, yeah, but what about this? This thing is still up in price. Yeah, it's probably because it's in short supply, whatever it happens to be. You know, one of the things that I'm noticing is that we at the store now are getting a lot of new products coming in. Like, and not like new, like we haven't had this particular product before. It's a new label. It's a new brand, right? It's the same product essentially, you know, like a type of paintbrush, so to speak. I don't know. I mean, I'm just picking out an item, but you know, one that we would have typically all the time, just kind of a cheaper one, now has a new label to it and a different price tag. You see, this is deflationary things that are taking place that nobody recognizes. It's big time. Like that paint really got me. I mean, I don't know how many people know about the story of the paint, but we used to sell two brands, right? Two different brands, different companies, right? One of them had a particular logo on it, a label, right? And it was very obvious. And it was a cheaper paint, right? And during COVID, that came up in short supply. The bases we couldn't get, so we just got rid of that line of paint altogether. And in fact, they just dropped it, discontinued it, saying, "Hey, this is like we can't get this anymore." Now that label is back, but it's not under the original brand. It's under a different brand name, right? So here we had these two different brands, one of them with a particular label. They dropped that label. Now that label appears on the other brand, right? And it's back at a cheaper price, but it's not the same company, you see? So it's like, even though all the paints have moved up in price, this is a new product, right? that nobody ever seen before, right? Apparently nobody ever seen this, but it has a lesser price tag to it. It's like, it's just some of the paints had all moved up, and you cannot drop the prices back down, right? All the input cost that went into the paint that's sitting on the shelf is now extremely high. So when you're producing new paint that is cheaper, you can't put it out there with that same logo and label as all the expensive paint out there, because nobody would buy the expensive paint. They would only want to buy the cheaper paint that you're bringing in. So all that stuff that's sitting out there in the system, that with the high input costs sitting on the shelf, is going to have to be sold for a higher price. And the only way to do that is to introduce the new paint with a cheaper price and a different label, right? And sell the other one as a higher quality or something like that. But this is I don't know if I described that right, but this is stuff that I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot of it happening. Unemployment is going to have to go up to crash housing. I totally agree with you, Matt. That's really what I see, like, being the only thing that's really going to hold the housing market up is the fact that if people are able to make their payment, if they can find a job, then they will do whatever they need to do in order to continue on making that house payment, because the rents are high and buying another house is too expensive. Letting go of your house is like the last option that anybody's going to do. During the great financial crisis, people let their houses go. They were like, I mean, I was one of them really, but people were like willing to let their houses go. That's not so much the case. I don't think that's going to be what a lot of people are feeling when they go into a housing downturn or an unemployment, situation where unemployment starts to rise. The people who had taken out loans during the great financial crisis were people who were in a position in which they should never have taken out the loan to begin with, but they were allowed to get them. That's not the case nowadays. There is, much higher restrictions, and the people who are getting loans nowadays are like the higher qualified people, not like they were during the great financial crisis. All right, I live in California, and I'm starting to see for lease and sale signs everywhere in my town. And that's another thing, like, when you haven't seen them for a long time. Like, I remember when I was a kid around this area, when I was, and then, I've been here since, like, the late 80s, so, like, I remember real estate signs, especially like when you would go out into like the country area. The real estate signs were everywhere. Like every third house would have, for sale sign on it. There was homes for sale everywhere. Now, not so much, right? Because all these houses like basically disappeared. Everybody wanted to buy a house or live in a house, and nobody wanted to sell one. So all these like homes left the market. Now we're seeing them come back onto the market, and people are like, man, this is really strange. Well, it's strange comparatively to the time when you haven't seen them, but it's not strange to typical, like the way it should be. Normally there should be a bunch of houses out there for sale, right? And when we hadn't seen it for a couple of years, all of a sudden now we see houses for sale. We're like, oh man, what's going on here? This is weird. Well, not really. I mean, it's kind of weird for what we've experienced lately, but not weird really, in general. All right, Thurston County, Washington, new housing development are slowing building on homes, half-done projects, prices dropping. Okay, rental prices here in Central California are also dropping by a few $100s. Let's go find that super chat. There it is. Hey, John, thank you so much for the $4.99, man. Crazy how the same "we are fine and there's no recession coming" terms and being thrown around just like 2008. Well, it's kind of funny, John, that's brought up, because really, it was, I've been saying this for a while, that this may be one of the first times we experienced a recession where we don't feel the pain of what we would typically experience during a recession. I said it months and months ago, before the Federal Reserve, or as the Federal Reserve was starting to raise rates, that there's two things that typically would just really be very painful for a recession. One of them is you lose your job, right? So if unemployment rises dramatically, that's very painful for the people, right? Now, if you have a situation where even if you have layoffs, like mass layoffs, like we have experienced, but there's a service industry that doesn't have a whole lot of employees in it, even though that's not a great job to have, like say at a tech company or something, or you had a great job at a tech company or something and you lose that, going to work at a service industry doesn't sound exactly appealing, but it's still a job, right? Now that's really what I think is going to end up happening, is that as a lot of these corporations begin to go into default and start to fail and layoffs or whatever, you're going to find a lot of those people finding work over in the service industries, or some of these places where there was trouble finding help. Well, they're going to find the work there, find the place to go to. That'll keep unemployment from rising dramatically, at least for a little while. And at the same time, when we have these corporations failing, we see that the Federal Reserve and in the Treasury, the government, have figured out a way to deal with a banking crisis, right? So here we had SVB going down, and they stepped up with the Bank Term Funding Program, which is something that not a lot of people were thinking about. So if they have a way to deal with the crisis in the banking system already, like they already got the idea of it, and they've bailed out a bunch of the corporations, and during the COVID, bailouts, with the special purpose vehicles being set up, I mean, corporations were able to get a lot of cheap funding during that time. Really, are they going to need a bailout? So those are the two major issues for a recession. Bailing out the corporations, everybody hates it, and people hate losing their jobs. But what if you don't have those two situations taking place? Like, you might have a downturn, you might have, a slowdown in the economy, you might have a bunch of corporations failing, but is the corporations failing enough to cause the unemployment to rise, or enough to cause the government to bail them out? And if those two things don't happen, could we slide through a recession that is like the non-recession recession? I mean, it seems that it could be leading towards something very much like that, which would be so unexpected from anybody who ever follows the economy, to say, man, that is not the way that a recession typically goes down, but it could be the way that this particular one goes down. I mean, it's seeming to be leading that way. All right. Eggs go bad after 30 days, not the case with gold. Well, actually, farm fresh eggs don't go bad after 30 days, and you don't even have to refrigerate them, which is really weird to think. Really like your studio office, practical and mobile. Yeah, thank you very much, man. I mean, I could build a studio, I could figure all this, but when I tried to do an office or whatever, everybody was like, man, you got to stay in the car, so in the car I am. All right, economist Nick Epperstead explains large source of non-unemployed individuals that may explain why the labor market is so tight. Mike Rowe podcast EP 274. I mean, I don't know. I have my theories with it. I mean, I think that the bailing out of the corporations during the COVID stimulus, with the special purpose vehicles, I mean, it wasn't a direct bailout, right? That's the thing. It wasn't like a government planned bailout of the corporations. What it was them saying, or the Federal Reserve saying, hey, we're going to buy a bunch of corporate debt. And everybody freaked out and said, oh shit, let's go ahead and front run the Federal Reserve. And they started buying into the corporate debt, driving the price of corporate debt up and the yields down, and the corporations were able to gorge on incredibly cheap debt. During that time, what did the corporations do? Once you have money, you have to start expanding operations, and part of that is hiring people. So I think that was one of the reasons why we saw a lot of people leave the service industry and move up into these corporations, is essentially they needed a place to spend the money. And then also with the PPP thing, there's like all these loans went out to these businesses to basically keep people employed, and so they had to spend a lot of this money on employees, and so they were hiring people that they probably really didn't even need to hire in order to spend that PPP loan, so they didn't have to pay it back. And I guess I'm assuming that a lot of employees had gone through that as well, although you don't really hear a lot of talk about that as much, especially coming from the business owners, hiring people they didn't need so they could keep the money. All right. Do you think there could come a day Altria dividends could fully replace your W-2 income? You should check out Petrobras PBR dividends. I will. And yeah, I would love for there to be a day in which that could happen. I'm going to have to do a little bit more about trying to figure out a way to make more money on the channel, monetizing the channel more without actually doing the sponsorships, because really I've been trying to not like focus in on anything that's going to be like sponsorship related, although I probably should, because like I kind of blew up ITM trading. I didn't really mean to, but Lynette Zhang was offering to sponsor the channel just off of referrals, and like you didn't even have to buy anything, just making a call to talk to him would have been enough for the sponsorship. But really I would like to do it more like crowd, like viewer funded sponsorships, where it's more of you guys sponsoring the channel itself and not me looking out there for advertisers to sponsor the channel. However I do that, I don't know. Like, I've been doing some like this is kind of interesting too, phone consultations, right? I've done a few of those recently, and that's been a lot of fun, where just sit around and talk about particular things that needed, somebody wanted to clarify, like something that I had an opinion on, or they wanted my opinion on a particular topic, or maybe they just wanted to share their ideas with me. But I've had a few of these phone calls and they worked out pretty well. So like consultations would be a lot of fun to do. I don't know, still trying to figure this out, you know what I mean? You can scramble eggs and then freeze them. You won't be bartering with strangers. It's easy to give your neighbor a 10th gram for a summer supply of eggs. Yeah. Well, last recession, the national debt was under 9 trillion. The recession, the national debt was 32 trillion. So it's going to be far worse than 2008. 1,000-year-old eggs, do they have a shelf life even if frozen? When housing inventory? I don't know. Like, I couldn't tell you what's going to cause the inventory to rise or if it will ever rise. Some people are anticipating, like, holding out, waiting, holding their breath, timing it, whatever. All the things that would have caused the housing market to crash, all the stuff that I thought would have taken place didn't happen. Like, when they were in that moratorium and people didn't have to make the rent payment or mortgage payment or anything, and I thought, man, once this comes to an end, it's going to be a heartache, right? Coming up with all that back pay and all that other stuff, back rent to try and pay. It didn't happen, right? They were like, nah, just refinance or whatever. They figured it out and it didn't crash the system. And I thought to myself, man, that blows me away. Like, how could you know ahead of time that by going into that moratorium that you were not going to crash the housing system or the housing market, only to have it like pull all the inventory off the market, causing housing prices to just go through the roof, right? It's just like, of course it did. Why wouldn't it have done that, It's not like, to me, it's not really trying to predict when something is going to change, but just trying to understand what it is that's taking place now. Even with like the shortages, like shortages aren't typical. People don't like, normally they want to produce more, right? More than enough, meet the demand or whatever. So when you find a lot of shortages happening out there, it's like, man, this isn't typical. There's going to be, a replenishing of all this stuff. And, but when it comes to the housing market, it operates a lot differently. When you have finance, like if there was no financing involved in housing, I don't think it would look anything like it does today, right? It would look very, very different than it does. But then again, we don't know exactly what the economic environment would look like, right? We wouldn't have nearly, the higher standard of living that we experience today if there was no financing taking place, because everybody lives off of credit, right? So you get to live this really nice, fancy life as long as you can make the minimum payment. There can only be one. Non-recession recession. Good point. Never thought of that. We shall see what happens. Yeah, and I made that prediction a while ago. It was just like, man, we really could fall into a position in which that these corporations don't need a bailout because they already got it. And even if they did get, all these people get laid off, there's plenty of jobs out there to go to. So, I don't know. It seems like that's the case, All right. Thank you very much. Limitless Living. I like that name. Thank you for the $5. Do you see home building slowing down short term? Yeah, but I mean, I see it slow right now, but I wouldn't think that to be the case. Like, I would think that more people, more builders would want to start building homes. I mean, even if you were to just kind of think with the idea of interest rates topping out or at least not going up any further, not even needing to go down, like just like the idea that they're not going to go any further, right? Topping out. With that idea, people are going to get very excited with the idea that the Federal Reserve will soon move in the opposite direction. When that starts to take place, now I'm not, positive on, what the people are going to do because nobody can predict the future, right? But I would assume that people who have been holding out, waiting to get a house are going to be like, here's my opportunity. I'm going to buy this house, even though it's not the interest rate I like. But if the Federal Reserve is not going to go up any further with this, then I can buy now and hopefully here in the future be able to refinance when the interest rates start to go down, right? And that's kind of like the idea going into it. Being able to do like, buy downs. There's a lot of that taking place within the market where they literally buy the interest rate down for the first few years of the loan or whatever. And maybe they're trying to get that and then skip into the idea of when they're able to like refinance when the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates. If that becomes the perception of the people, then I can see where the builders would really want to start ramping up production to try and take advantage of of the home buyer traffic, right? Because that's really what's keeping the home builder sentiment down right now is home buyer traffic. People are just not interested in going out there and doing it yet, right? They're just too concerned about what could be in the future, whether or not they're going to be able to afford these payments, what's going to happen with their job. There's too much concern out there. But once that starts to wane, I would imagine that the builders would probably want to take advantage of that and start pumping out a lot of homes. But I don't know. It's going to be hard to tell. Because a lot depends on what the Federal Reserve does and what the narrative is, right? If people are in the belief that the Fed is going to be lowering interest rates, it will create an entire economic environment than if there was one in which the people felt like the Federal Reserve is going to keep interest rates elevated. I mean, if those are the two stories that are being told, one of them is like, hey, we're promising you that better times are ahead, or another one that says, yeah, no, it's going to stay tough for a while. Whatever those two perceptions are, will change the economic environment out there. All right. They will be printing eggs in the future. All right. Me and the dog doing carnivore diet. He loves it. Lucky on an acreage. All right. Just go for the sponsorship. If the sponsorship is something I don't care about, I will pay attention to it. Or I don't care about it. I won't pay attention to it. Well, thank you, Matt. I really should. I should do more of them or whatever. But, really it was the... I think it had something to do more with the energy that was within me on it, right? Because I never really did this YouTube channel to try and make money. Like, that was never my real goal. My whole goal was to make $100 because that's the threshold for Google to send you anything, right? So that was my whole goal, was to earn $100 on YouTube. And once I did it, I'm like, well, hell, I want to do that again. But I never really took like the idea. It was just like, man, how do I make money doing YouTube, right? The money just kind of came. Like, it was just like, this started showing up one day. Like, literally, it was just like, man, views are kicking up and, channel's doing well and, the ad revenue was doing well. And I was just like, man, I didn't even really try to do the money part of it. I was just trying to focus in on making good videos and try and get just trying to do the videos. And so once it achieved a certain level and I did a few sponsorships, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like I had the same energy going into the videos like I had before. And even after, even if it wasn't like a sponsored video, just the general nature I had for the channel, or the feeling for the channel, it just wasn't the same, and I'm like, man, what did I lose here? What's going on? Like, how come I don't have that same kind of feeling or energy going on with this channel, where it was just like this passion that I was just pouring out videos and didn't care what came from it. I was just putting them out there, just to do it. And then like I started pursuing it, like, hey, let's monetize it, let's see if we can get some more money in. And then things just didn't feel right. Like it just felt like the channel was deteriorating in a way. So it was just like, well, go back to what you were doing, man. Just go back to making videos, the ones that you know you want to put out there, not the ones that you're trying to get attention from or anything else. Just, just be yourself and go do your thing. And so, like, that's what I'm going to do for a while and try and get back into that, that feeling again that I had. Hasn't been long enough to see an impact as far as housing. Yeah. Let's see. If there were no bailouts, the housing market would be totally different. Yeah, I could see that. San Francisco is the capital of AI creation program. Happened today. The evening the Kansas Bank Commissioner closed Heartland Tri-State Bank of Elkhart to protect depositors. The FDIC entered into an agreement with Dream First Bank of Syracuse. Yeah, you're going to see a lot more of that. There's going to be a huge concentration of banks, consolidation of banks, but that's been taking place for a long, long time. That's not like something that's new that's kicked in. That's been going on for quite a while. All right. The Fed is updating their capital requirements for large U.S. banks more stringent. Fits your theory that they are going to let recession occur and weather it. See who makes it out. Yeah, and it's. I mean, when you have this, okay, everybody saw all this money pour into the economy, and all of a sudden, like this booming thing started happening from it. Well, there was a lot of zombies that rose from that, and they know it. Like, they know zombie people and zombie corporations came up from all this, stimulus that had taken place. Well, in order to fix that problem, the Federal Reserve literally just has to sit on their hands and do nothing at all, right? They just sit there and watch the quantitative tightening take place and let the failures happen. Right? Free market forces will come in and fix the problem, right? I mean, if you want to call it a problem, or fixing, I don't know, it depends on how you look at it. But ultimately, if you consider that the zombie corporations, the zombie people are a problem, what the Federal Reserve and what their actions as far as going into quantitative tightening, reeling in the liabilities and allowing the interest rates to remain elevated, cures the zombie shit, right? It burns out the undergrowth so that new development can start taking place. Get rid of all that bad debt, So yeah, I can see it really happening. Thank you for the comment, bud. That was good. Banks will merge one world bank. Yeah. Interesting piece. Thank you. All right. If that's the case, what indicators could home builders possibly look at to spot a rise in buy downs? Well, I think that's just naturally occurring, and I think it's a lot of the home builders who were offering up those buy downs so that they could keep the house price at the same, like, not offer a better price on the house, just leave the house price at what it was, but then offer to buy down their interest rate on their loan. And I think a lot of home builders were offering that up. But as far as like an indicator, I don't know, like, the home buyer, like, because really all the home builder sentiment has turned positive except for buyer traffic. And outside of maybe real estate agents, I can't think of who it is that would be like the first in line to notice an increase in buyer traffic. Because really, an individual realtor could be like, man, I'm getting a lot of calls, I'm getting a lot of showings or whatever, but that may not necessarily be something that you can go to a chart and track, and say like, hey, that's what's going on. And then again, if you're talking to a realtor, you might be just talking to somebody who has an opinion of of their particular area, and doesn't necessarily give you like a general view of the entire housing market. So once buyer traffic, like however you can figure that part out. If you know a bunch of realtors from across the country or whatever, if you could see that really start to ramp up, then I think that would be like the leading indicator before the home builders take off. All right, you talk about panic buying like they don't know this is happening. They do this on purpose because it's better to have on hand extra rather than not enough. Profit overall always met, all good. You talk about panic buying like they don't know this is happening. They don't know it's happening. The distribution line does not know. Like, they might have an idea that it's happening, but okay, so like I ordered 30 pieces of trim for stock. They sent me 10. The next time we ordered 100 pieces. Right? Even if we got the 100 pieces, we would have been okay with it. But we ordered 100 because we really just wanted 30. But we put in an order for 100. Right? So, yeah, that's an overwhelming consumer demand that's completely false. Because everybody was doing that. Everybody was doing the exact same thing. Like, everybody needed 30, but everybody was ordering 100. Right? That's why China, like, is suffering as bad as they are right now, is because nobody's placing any orders. They don't need anything. So China's manufacturing is like sucking right now. It's really in bad shape. And their youth unemployment is rising in a dramatic fashion. And when you have a bunch of youth that is somewhat educated, that's a really dangerous scenario to be in. Okay. Housing market looks bleak. Austin, Texas, Phoenix. Home of Lynette dropping in demand, Las Vegas. No recession for the next 5 years. We'll see. I mean, the non-recession recession, right? A new bank just failed. Wonder if you are aware of it yet. Well, I think John was just talking about it, and I didn't, to be honest, I haven't read up on that one today. So, Creature from Jekyll Island to 1984. Banks on the verge now. B of A drops then. Oh, what is going on here? Was that all of them? Was that all the comments? There we go. Did I get all those comments? I think I did. Let me just cruise back up here to the top real quick. I don't want to miss anybody. Nice. Cool. 50% UE in China for youth. Yeah, I mean, I know that, like, there's a lot of numbers that come out. I was going off of the 20% because that's like what China's saying is like the official number. I don't know if that's like what they're saying still. I know, like, the other numbers, like China is just like, you know, they're just manipulators of hell, especially when it comes to their data. I would imagine like 50% is a bit high, but if it is 50%, you can imagine that like kind of scenario is going to create very frustrated people, right? And when you have a frustrated youth like that, you really have like a lot of out of control situations. That's when the rioting and protests and all the other stuff starts to happen. So at 50%, if it is 50%, give it any kind of length of time and it's going to erupt, right? I'm sure of it. You know, if they can't figure out how to deal with it anyway. Kenosha says good evening. All right, my hands are busy, or I'd comment. No problem, bro. All right, I still got my 95 Chevy S10. It has 827,000 miles on it. Wow. And it just came from Florida to California, original motor and tranny. And we call the old truck the percolator. Funny. Right on. How long have I been out here? For almost an hour. Cool. Well, maybe we'll give it like another 10 minutes, guys, because I do have some family stuff that I have going on tonight. I just thought it would be cool to come out and hang out with you for a little bit, do the live stream, and talk about the bullwhip effect, since I came across that article talking about the semiconductor glut. And knowing that I had put out the video 2 years ago saying that the glut, or the shortages were going to turn into a glut, everybody said I was crazy back then too. Not everybody, a lot of people thought I was, but all right. When you are strong, make them think you are weak. Yeah. No, so true, right? Always keep them guessing. All right. Just getting ready for the bonfire. Nothing shameful at this time. Oh, very cool, man. Yeah, actually, because when the burn season kicks in, like, you're not allowed to have any kind of open fires anywhere around Oregon, and especially during the dry seasons. But I have a propane fire pit, right? So you can have those, and it's not like an open like wood fire pit. And last night, we sat around that thing till about 10 o'clock, and I was thinking, man, this thing is pleasant. It's the first time we had actually sat around it sat around that fire pit of this propane one. Normally I have a wood fire pit. But we sat and it was so pleasant. I'm thinking, man, this is nice, consistent heat that comes off of it. You don't have a bunch of smoke in your face. And then this morning, because I can't sleep, I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, I really enjoyed that fire pit. I went out there, and 3 o'clock in the morning, sitting out there drinking coffee, looking at the stars, and reading up on economics. So I'm going to do that again tonight. All right, been looking in Pittsburgh, and the market is not cooling off at all. If there is a good or decent deal, even if it's full Reno, it's getting scooped up. Me too, been clearing trees, too old, though 20 minutes. 100-mile house checking in. Mills have dropped production significantly. Oh, 100-mile, man. That's like logging area. That's forestry country right up there. Significant, but they are real busy in the bush preparing blocks for future logging. Yeah, that's the area. That's like the thick of like forestry industry is up there at 100 Mile. NH, have you been there? I don't know that one. Infamous NYC. Pittsburgh is still relatively affordable. Quality of living is pretty solid as well. Renovation. Oh, that makes sense. Thank you for that infamous NYC. It's a good possibility in a few years you may become an Idaho resident. No, that's over on the, I don't know why Idaho would even want to take on any of Oregon. It would be like, man, why would we want any of your messed up stuff, See, the eastern side of the state of Oregon is very conservative, and so I could see why they would want to be like part of Idaho, which would be, very much in line with their kind of thoughts and stuff. I would only assume. I've never been there. The West Coast, the west side of the state, man, hardcore liberal nation over here. It's a good possibility. Oh, we already read that. Okay, someday I hope we laugh at all the things that the government dictates we can and cannot do. Been doing well. Fishing was good, but price was really mockery. Yeah. Hey, that's why I'm looking in Pittsburgh. Most of my family is in Pennsylvania, but prefer a bit more city life. That's suburbs where they live. Hi, Carmen. I work in flex packing materials, and we've seen business pick up in the last 4 weeks. Hopefully, we've seen the bottom. Yeah, it's possible. I think, honestly, we're going to see the gluts start to hit the markets. And people are going to be like, okay, inflation is over, right? But there's a problem that's taking place, and just China is an example of it. China is the manufacturing powerhouse. And although we are finding manufacturing leaving China and moving to other industries or other nations, as far as these industries leaving China is still the major producer of stuff, right? And so when you see the manufacturing slowing down, that's the stuff that we are eventually going to want, right? But that's not being produced. So when we think about the shortages that we have experienced over, when we experienced over the last couple of years, that was due to a severing of the supply chain, right? That's what caused the shortages out there. People just weren't distributing. Now, when you have 100 freighters sitting off the port of LA with all that stuff, right, sitting on those freighters or sitting in the containers, sitting at the ports or sitting on the rail lines and not distributing through the system, then people are going to see those shortages. They're going to say, man, I cannot get these items, right? Prices are going to move up. But then eventually all that stuff starts to come through. And people are like, oh man, there is no shortages. All this stuff is available. I don't really need all the things that I had ordered before, but yet they're still coming in. So the orders stop going to China. China stops producing. Okay? Eventually the stuff that we have here gets consumed. I mean, eventually it finds its place and gets sold. And then the orders start to kick into China, but there's nothing that's been produced. So there's going to be a gap in production. And when you have that gap in production taking place, then you have real shortages, because it's not like the shortages that we had experienced when we just couldn't get the stuff because it was stuck out there on a ship or on a rail or in a box somewhere. We're not going to get the stuff. We're going to have a shortages because it simply just wasn't made, right? And then there will be a real shortages. So I think that the shortages are still coming. We're going to have another experience of a different type of shortages. And that's going to be very painful for people, because we're going to find inflation start to kick back up again, and they're going to think, oh man, the Federal Reserve had failed, right? That's one of the reasons why I feel the Federal Reserve is going to keep the interest rates elevated for a significant amount of time, because they want to experience that drop in prices and then the shortages kicking in again and know right where that level is, right? Because if the shortages are quite dramatic and you have the prices moving back up again, there's no other way for the Federal Reserve to combat that, right? Other than keeping the interest rates elevated and then eventually wait for production to kind of meet the demand that's out there. I don't know if I said all that right, but we still have shortages coming. I believe that there's going to be another inflation scenario following that. All right. Hello, Simon from Central California. Mega shakedown. I'm about to smoke a doobie. And on. So it's like the bumper crop issues of the 1920s. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Like, a lot of people think about what happened here in the United States when it came to the Great Depression, and the debt bubble that was created there was due to like a lot of the manufacturing that was happening here in the United States and being exported over to the European nations for the war effort. And and a lot of people want to, like, they don't think about the timelines because they're so far. It's a long timeline on it. A lot of people say, well, no, the war was here and this and all that. The time of production takes a while, right? Especially if you can consider like back, during World War I or whatever. People who were farmers, like most people were farmers. Right? That was like probably like the number one self-employed position out there was farming, right? But if you're a European, right, and you're a farmer, you're not farming anymore, you're fighting, right? So you need to get the production from other nations, and that's where the United States has stepped up. So the United States is like, here, they're pumping out all this stuff and pushing it over and selling it over to the European nations for, their war efforts. Well, when eventually the war turns off, it's like, who do you sell all this stuff to, right? You're like constantly selling it out there. Well, all of a sudden now you have an issue where these guys are starting to produce for themselves again. It took a while, right? I mean, you're still producing and sending it over there for a while, but they're starting to increase their own production, and eventually they just don't need you anymore, right? And that's what ends up happening. Like if you lose your manufacturing base, right, or you lose the customer for your manufacturing base, who do you sell to? And that's a lot of what China is going to end up facing. UE, you are one of the most consistent and hardest working financial channels on YouTube. Did you have to cut back on your hours at your job at the lumberyard to focus more on YouTube? No. And see, that's really where I think like some of like some of the stagnant, like the stagnantness, how do I say that? Anyway, the stagnating of the channel was due to the fact that I have a full-time job, right? and not being able to focus in on everything that I needed to advance the channel, because I got full-time job, got family, got the YouTube channel. And so people were like, well, you got to find balance. You got to find balance in all this other stuff. Well, I can't balance out my full-time job. That's consistent. Like, that's the full-time job, right? And I can't really, like, balance out and deprive my family. Like, I mean, I have, and I do, but I shouldn't be doing that, right? You got to have, like, as much time as you can for family. That puts YouTube at the very back of the line, right? Which is probably the worst place it could be, because really YouTube and the things that I could do with it could do so much more for my family and my life and everything else going on, but yet I put it all the way to the very end of the line because I got to find some sort of balance. I mean, what is this? Like, I don't even get it. So yeah, no, I didn't cut back on any hours. I just get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I start reading articles and coming up with ideas for videos, or trying to answer emails or come up with the next thing. I don't sleep a lot. I really don't. 4 or 5 hours a night if I'm lucky. All right, the market is like 1800s hotel in the westerns, a beautiful facade out front, but a nasty whorehouse on out back. Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it. Egg white omelet does not make any sense. All nutrients are in the yolk. Potato skin. Yeah, I agree. I like eggs. I like the whole thing. I don't care. Osama, thank you so much for the $5, man. Keep up the great work, brother. I listen to all your content when I'm working in the landscaping. Learned more here than any other economic channel. Well, thank you so much, Osama. I really appreciate you, sending me the $5. And you guys are always very supportive of the channel, and I really appreciate it. And comments like that, that's really what does it for me. You know, we all pick up this knowledge, right? We all have specialized knowledge when it comes to anything. My wife and I, we were talking about this earlier today. And like, you might ask the question, hey, do you know something about mechanics? And you could be like, yeah, man, I know a lot about mechanics. It'd be like, great, man, can you go swap out the engine of my truck? And we're like, whoa, I don't know that. I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. And it's just like, well, wait a minute. You understand about mechanics, right? I mean, why can't you go and swap out I'm looking for a mechanic, right? Well, just because I understand mechanics doesn't mean I know how to do that kind of work. I might understand mechanics and I design and draft and, engineer stuff, right? But a actual twisting of wrenches, I don't know. I like different kind of knowledge, right? Same thing when it comes to economics, right? Just because you have like the mechanic, there's a guy who knows how to, twist wrenches and can rebuild carburetors and stuff, but he doesn't know how to design an engine, like draw out and, engineer an engine together. But you might be able to work on one and know how to do that, where somebody who knows how to design an engine may not even know how to work on one, doesn't know how to twist wrenches or anything like that. I mean, that very well could be the case. And so I think about that a lot of times when people say, do you know anything about mechanics? Well, yeah, but what level, what kind, specialized knowledge. Same thing when it comes to economics, right? It's almost the exact same way. Like, and I know it from like the lumber industry. Here I am, I'm just a dude who works retail, right? I literally ring people up at a cash register, right? I sell a 2x4, I go down and I put it into his truck, right? And to have the lumber story that I did was so vast, so deep, so like I had all the corners of it. There's people who were sitting right next to me at work who did not know this lumber story that I was telling, because of the amount of research that I was doing, because of the phone calls that I was making, because of the interactions that I was having with everybody around me to try and get the best understanding of the lumber story that I could. And so when I was listening to news articles or other people out there talking about lumber, and I'm like, for as much knowledge as you have in this particular subject, you're missing it, right? Because apparently you haven't heard the lumber story coming from me, because, everything that you're saying is very close, but still not quite there, right? And that's the case, because it's true. They didn't have all the information, just like I don't have all the information when it comes to the BRICS New World Order currency that they're trying to set up that I still don't believe exists yet, right? You know, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of knowledge on that. Maybe somebody who has some really deep understanding of how this new currency is going to totally take over and destroy the dollar, even though it doesn't exist yet, right? I mean, maybe somebody has some specialized knowledge inside of that. The things that I know about the economy and the currencies and everything else, I don't see it, right? I don't see it that way. Much like somebody else who saw the lumber story and said, hey, man, this is nothing but Federal Reserve money printing. I was telling a much different story, right? And I would think I was a little bit more accurate than the money printer go burr people, you know? All right, moving on here. See, an hour and 4. Okay, I'll give it another 5 or 10 minutes here, guys. All right, have you started a college fund for your kids? No, really, I haven't. And the reason why is because like 3-4 years ago, I was completely broke, right? So as far as like starting a separate fund for the kids, I haven't, right? Now, I do have money for my kids. If they choose to use that for college, so be it. But it's not like an actual set-aside college fund, right? But I mean, it is money that they could use for college, so I guess it could be considered that. All right. Have you started a Rumble account? I did, but I haven't been posting stuff there. I probably should. See, that was the other thing. Like, and I know people are like, no, you can just upload it and then not worry about it. The thing about having other platforms like, you know, the Twitter, the Facebook, all the other stuff is that I just trying to be active enough here on YouTube is hard enough. Trying to be out there on all these other platforms and just try to be like, even in Instagram, I have people who message me on Instagram and I don't see it for like a month and I feel like terrible about it. I'm like, oh man, you know, I mean, I could have answered this question or whatever. I just simply missed it because there's like, you know, all these different platforms that people could be messaging me on. So I haven't started these other ones, right? Again, like if I quit my job and I started doing something like that, then, you know, I'd probably be able to come up with the money that I could quit my job and just do these other, you know, just spend 8 hours a day being on all these different platforms, communicating on them. Yeah. All right. Yeah, hit the like button. Thank you so much for hitting that like button. We have almost 100 likes with 104 viewers. That is so awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. All right. Hi, Simon. The major railroad I work for is taking big steps for the shortages that are coming. Good job calling the coming shortages for months. Bro, man, what's happening, man? See, now you got me excited. It's like, dude, what is it? What is it you hear, man? What is it you know? What's going on? See, and I was just suspicious of it, right? I mean, it was just like, man, this just seems too, like, you know, just like if you just, what I end up doing a lot of times is I will think of like as many scenarios as I can think of. Like, okay, like just think of as many possible avenues of approach to this, you know, what could possibly come. And just follow the one of least resistance. Like there's going to be one that is like, New World Order currency going to take over the dollar next year. Nope. Major resistance, not going to happen. Don't even have to follow that one. Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility, so you can kind of, you know, narrow possibility. But most likely that's not going to be the one, right? So I just kind of follow, again, like, you know, just look and see what is the path of least resistance. Even now you're starting to see, like, you're going to find it, right? I'm not trying to make the predictions of it because I'm already starting to see the articles of it, but, you know, the BRICS nations, they're trying to, hey, let's recruit the whole world in, right? What are you going to do? Just recruit a bunch of misfits who come in and destroy your whole system? I mean, you got to have, like, big players, like good players, confident players, right? People who have the confidence of the confidence of the world, right? Confidence of the world. This is how, like, you build up, you know, a currency. I mean, or at least a fiat currency. If you have gold, then you don't have to worry about the confidence of the people, right? But then you do have a whole list of other issues that come from it. Like, once you get rid of the confidence, now you have this hard money currency you have to deal with. Okay, well, let's do world trade in that. Who's going to pay for the storage, security, transportation? Who's going to pay for all that stuff? Is that you or me, right? Because when we hold treasuries and we use U.S. treasuries to do our international deals, we actually get paid a little bit, although we may not be able to fight inflation or whatever, because we're holding on to U.S. Treasuries, you know, if the Treasuries are yielding low, but at least it doesn't cost you anything, right? You get to hold on to an international currency for the most part that doesn't cost you storage fees, security fees, or transportation fees. Right? These are two different, you know, again, you know, follow the path of least resistance. Which one is it most likely going to be? People are going to want to hold on to gold that they have to pay security, storage fees, and transportation fees, or are they going to hold on to U.S. Treasuries that are paying them a 5% interest? Right? You know, I mean, again, it's all about trust. All right. Man, I want to know what's going on with the railroads now. All right. When you are in the field, you learn an immense amount of invaluable content. I drove Uber full-time here in D.C. and Baltimore for 3 years. I learned so much about human psychology from that job. Oh man, I can imagine that would be definitely be a position to be in, especially in that particular area, because you could, you know, hearing the thoughts and insights from people, you know, like that. Crazy times. All right, guys, this has been a lot of fun, but I'm gonna go home and hang out with the family for a little bit. Thank you very much for being part of the stream today. We have 106 of you watching, 116 likes, which is just incredible. Thank you so much for all those likes. $14.99 in super chats, because you guys are so awesome and wanting to support the Uneducated Economist and everything that we're doing here. Thank you everybody for being part of the channel. I can never thank you guys enough. Uneducated Economist, you let me know. All right, let me say thank you, Simon, and all the participants. Thank you, All Nighter, man. It's good to have you back, bro. It really is. All right, adios. You guys are really awesome.